Hey, y'all, this is Dan with the Hemp Highway of Kentucky, and I am talking to a couple of really great connections I made on LinkedIn. It's James Stevens and Taylor Woods, a couple of engineers and entrepreneurs who do all sorts of interesting stuff. They make stuff, they test stuff, and one of the things that I think will be really interesting for a lot of you all is they kind of actually experiment with some of the miracles of hemp to see just how viable some of our uh, beliefs and wishes are. So kind of they call it myth busting. And so we're here talking with James and Taylor. How y'all doing?
Pretty good. As good as can be, I'd say.
I'm doing excellent. Good, bad, or indifferent. Montana's opening up, and I actually don't even think we've had any spreads in a while. And I think we're under like 30 total cases in the state. So for us, it's kind of like it'll be an influx from out of state in for tourism to Glacier or Yellowstone or whatever that'll probably cause any further problems if they occur in this state, not domestic stuff.
It's kind of like self-isolating by your state of residence.
Yeah, kind of. And I think that's one of the benefits the whole West has, is kind of we're spread out. We're not dense. We kind of have all those advantages going for us.
Absolutely. It makes it really nice. Like when I go to the store, I don't worry that much because the county, well, James and I are both in, there's no active cases. There hasn't been a new case in, I don't know, like a week or so. So once those people start coming in, though, from all the states around, things will change. But might as well enjoy it now, I suppose.
Yeah, enjoy it while you can before all the people that were probably down in Florida want to go north. Yeah. So one of the things that we've been talking about doing, the three of us have kind of like bonded over some of these more outlandish claims of things that can be done with hemp. And one that we've been discussing quite a lot recently is the hemp airplane that this guy's been flogging on the internet and trying to raise, I think, like $250,000 or something like that through a GoFundMe account. What do y'all think about that?
It's entertaining to watch would be my first reaction.
I think my first reaction is more it makes me irate just because I know it's trying to ride the wave of kind of advocacy and self-fund something that is just not technically feasible based on how it's described, just by kind of riding on the backs of everyone who is kind of pursuing this for a variety of what I would consider as authentic or, I guess, cause-based reasons.
And like the other thing for me, it's trying to solve a problem that isn't a problem. There's no issue utilizing titanium, aluminum, stainless steel, and composites for aerospace. So why would we need to add hemp into something that it's not traditionally been in? The only counter to that, I would say, is them saying that they're going to use hemp-based fuels to power this aircraft. And that's a whole other issue of problems and things like that.
Yeah, and I forget from the article if he was talking about doing some sort of jet fuel or if he was just doing standard aviation fuel.
I'm quite certain it was talking about using some kind of hemp fuel product. And if memory serves correct, this one might be a bit of a stretch on that memory, but they were talking about some kind of an alcohol fuel, so like a hemp ethanol or methanol or something. But that might have been some other outlandish thing that I saw over the past couple months.
Yeah, the whole hemp plane thing spurs all these kind of side articles and follow-up articles and excitement and sharing. It's like, I guess it'd be the epitome of, how quickly viral bad news can spread or inaccurate information across, doesn't matter whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever, all the different platforms that are out there. Because, a lot of it just doesn't get fact checked. One of the things I really like about LinkedIn, good, bad, or indifferent, is there's usually at least someone out there, usually an engineer or a scientist or whatever, that'll eventually chime in on a post if it's aggravating them enough to be like, all right, this makes absolutely no sense, or this isn't technically feasible, or why would you do this? I think I'm especially sensitive to it. Working in the hemp space, and Taylor and I got into working on hemp really to help some farmers we knew that got kind of effectively hosed by a processor a couple of years ago that came in and said they were going to make billions of dollars, and had this guy plant thousands of acres of hemp, and then the hemp turned out to be low potency Canadian varietals and not what he said, and the whole thing. And so we kind of started out this whole thing, viewing it as an ingredient or raw material for something like a hemp plane, and kind of got into it to kind of like undo someone else's mess up. And so kind of we have a different view of like how we got dragged into the industry, a couple of years ago. We didn't get into it. Later, I got into it for personal reasons, like on health with my family and stuff like that. I started exploring that. But like we initially got into it to be like, hey, I got promised all this stuff and now I have all this hemp. What do I do?
So kind of like coming out and cleaning up a mess, like the like Mr. Wolfe in Pulp Fiction. You come in and clean up the mess that somebody else created.
Absolutely, it's kind of that role. And I think that's what makes me particularly sensitive to either something like, hey, it can replace all the fuel in the world, or it's stronger than steel, or you can build an airplane completely out of it, or all these different things that come in from there. It's like, no, it can do a lot of amazing things, and we need to focus on what it's good at. But kind of like what we always say, and this comes out of working in the sustainability and biofuel space, is it's not a silver bullet solution. It's a golden buckshot, right? It's going to be hundreds of these, sustainable, biotech-based, whatever you want to call them. It's going to be hundreds of these things that come together to make a universal solution. The world got addicted, everyone always jokes about oil and addiction, right? We got kind of addicted to the fact that oil did so much for us, right? From pharmaceuticals to plastics to paints to energy to whatever. And so the whole world got used to a single solution. But if you go pre the oil revolution, it was thousands of different technologies were kind of making up what modern life was, or modern at the time, pre, let's say 1890. It wasn't, most of the stuff that we were using wasn't universal everywhere. Our food wasn't universal. The technologies we were using weren't universal. It was kind of scattered. And I think that's what we're going to have to go back to eventually, whether you focus on peak oil theory or sustainability or whatever. Sure doesn't look like we're going to hit peak oil with pricing right now, right?
It's a good point. Yeah, I think that's one of the, when you're coming at this, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a humanities person by education. I just worked in manufacturing for years. So when you come at this from a background that is not technical, you don't think about things like how incredibly resource rich petroleum is, that it isn't just you take petroleum and it's either gasoline or plastic. It's when you start refining it, certain byproducts become gasoline, certain byproducts can become plastic, other byproducts can become kerosene, whatever. And with hemp,
polymers, pharmaceuticals, vitamins, all of it, right? It's in everything. Like when you start looking at it, I think at one point, in the early 2000s, working in the biofuel sector, you looked at oil and it was like in 96% of all consumer goods in some form or another. And it could have been, it's a synthetic vitamin and it's made up a part of that, or, a flavoring component, or the plastic packaging or whatever. It didn't matter. 96% of all consumer goods, had petroleum touch it at one point.
And on top of that, to get it from the point of origin to that customer and in their hands, you got to burn oil to get it from point A to point B. So there's really nothing that you can interact with in your daily life. Probably not at all, unless you've been living in a forest by yourself with canvas tents for like the last 50 years, that hasn't in some way directly or indirectly been a part of the petroleum life cycle.
Good point. I mean, its footprint is pretty much the entire globe.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we look at the hemp plane, we can focus on the hemp plane for a second again. I think there are components that could be utilized in the hemp plane. So we talk about, like reinforced fiberglass fibers, right, that are part of it, or putting it in a plastic mixture for the seats inside of the plane or whatever. There are components where hemp can go into it, right? Like we've taken hemp, we've taken the omega-3s from hemp and made nylon from it, right? Nylon 9. Really expensive nylon 9, right? Converting omega-3 oils into nylon is just probably, it was a fun experiment, but the base material was costing us $47 a kilo. So, no one wants a couple $100 pair of nylons when you're all said and done, right?
Right.
I mean, except maybe as a marketing gimmick or whatever from there. And so there's a lot that you can do from there that's there, but really I like to say that almost all of that is window dressing, right? It's not what makes a plane really a plane. Sure, like you can do it, but the tensile strength of polymers and fibers and core and all that kind of stuff, there's so much work that would need to be done. Really, the only thing I see it being done is like, some textile fabrics, maybe fiberglass paneling, and the seats inside the plane and any kind of molded plastic. That could all potentially be done with hemp filler, hemp product. I guess you could go really crazy and ferment the hemp to PLA and make all the plastic components, PLA based, but it's pretty complicated to do that. It'd be really expensive for almost no real reason,
Yeah, I see what you're saying about that. I mean, it's like you were saying, it sounds so fun to like, the Henry Ford hemp car. Oh my God, he made this car out of hemp. But when you do the research, it's like, well,
wasn't it actually soy
in there?
Yeah, I think that's what we found, right? The research was soy.
Exactly. It's like 80% soy, and I think there was hemp fiber in some of the panels, but it wasn't like, I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding around what's been called the $1 billion crop and the conspiracy to hide it. My understanding, and I talked to a guy who wrote his master's thesis on the conspiracy to make hemp illegal. And the $1 billion crop article in Popular Mechanics, which is about how the decorticator is going to make cellulose available for all these things, was written by the guy who had the patent on the decorticator.
Yeah, I mean that's how most of it works and gets moved forward, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff. I think people don't understand with natural materials, right? You're really almost exclusively designing your products. And so this doesn't matter whether you're flavor and fragrance or trying to do an extract and make a tincture or a candy bar, or you're trying to build a polymer or whatever. When you're using natural materials, you're always attempting to shore up or defeat a natural disadvantage of that product when you're developing your other stuff. Doesn't matter whether it's a bad taste or you're stuck with certain tensile strength or whatever. You're always designing around the limitations. And I think one of the things that kind of the petroleum age and synthetic chemistry opened up that people forget is you were literally able to build stuff from scratch to where you could engineer or do chemistry to remove all those limitations you were traditionally done. And so it really changed the mindset of innovators, engineers, like a lot of the 20s and 30s German scientists, what they were doing with some of the new polymers and stuff then. They went from this world of overcoming limitations to the world as the sky was the limit. And they could design almost anything. And I think that's a huge mindset that people got used to that almost needs to be overcome again when you're looking back at natural materials. Everyone's trying to take this, the sky's the limit because we have this material. And I can tell you what, if everything could have been made out of cellulose, DuPont would have started doing that in the 2000s when there was all those tax credits and stuff to make stuff from cellulose.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, when you do the research into some of the war effort in World War II, it starts out, for me, I start down the road with Hemp for Victory, and then it branches off into other what at the time was called chemergy, which is the science of converting cellulose into other products, in short. I think like 80% of the rubber that was produced for tires during the war was made from ethanol. But after the war, when supplies of rubber became available, it was just so much cheaper to actually use rubber than it was. I mean, you can, like you were saying, you can make almost anything. And one of the things that the war effort did was really advance the knowledge of petroleum-based chemistry. Because they were really kind of neck and neck up until the 1950s, and then petroleum just went boom.
Yeah, and it was that, I mean, it's energy dense, it can be fractionated, it's really easy to manipulate with chemistry, it's
easy to transport.
Yeah, it's cheap to transport, like energy density. When you start looking at transporting biomass or even ethanol on a unit volume for energy density versus, doing a hydrocarbon crude material, it's just crazy how the economics improve so much. Same with like high intensity anthracite coal and all that kind of stuff. And those are the things I think people really forget is it just was more convenient, which is why we started using it.
I would say a lot of people, if they were going to be honest with themselves, like I try to be, is, you know, you guys, when you were in high school chemistry, it was like interesting and you went for good grades. For somebody like me, I read the stories about the chemists that did stuff, but I didn't learn crap about how any of that worked. And part of that was just me being intellectually lazy. But I think there's a lot of people that just, they understand some of these basic concepts, but they haven't done the deeper dig to really see how it all works.
And I think,
I'm not trying to be insulting.
I think another one is a lot of people that are really in the space and have been in the space for some time. They're really vested in seeing what they've been believing for so long come to fruition. So they kind of just enter a state of denial, even when presented with facts that run contrary to their beliefs and, you know, existing line of thinking, which is really interesting. But you can see that same behavior kind of transcend across different, you know, disciplines, sectors, industries, stuff like that. So I don't know. I think there's a big play with all of it in there. And the only way to really get people on the same mindset to see like this is what actually is doable is to do it and show the logic and the numbers and, you know, comparisons and stuff like that. So that way we don't have people saying hemp is going to save the world, you know, because of A, B, C, and bring those people back in. We're like, all right, it can go in here, it can go in there to make things better, but incrementally better, not trying to do it all in one giant leap like so many people, at least I've interacted with, think you can do.
Well, and I think that's the biggest issue with dealing with anything that's advocacy based, right? So done a lot of work in like what they call clean label, which is cleaning the label, and natural product development. And it's very much the same mentality, right? Even if a synthetic pathway is more effective, safer, whatever, because it's quote unquote not natural, there's whole groups of people that won't even touch it, right? Or you can't work with it, or they have some problem with it. And then that's the problem with anything that's advocacy based as opposed to factual based. However, I think the thing that gets narrowly focused is, you know, you do focus on the microcosm instead of the whole picture, right? So I can argue all day long that, you know, metallic and hemp solutions metallic and oil solutions make sense now, but when you look at the whole ecosystem and global stuff and environmental destruction and preservation of species and, you know, all the socioeconomic factors and, you know, social justice and everything else, then stuff stops making sense again, right? And it's really, how do you, as a product developer, how do you, as an advocate in the space, especially when we talk about hemp, right? How, as an advocate and a product developer, how do you really jive, you know, both the microcosm of economics and the macrocosm of everything else that's involved in this whole thing? And that's really where the quandary and all the ethical debates and the humanities component really comes into it, right? Is how do we do this technically and socially in the correct way?
That's a good point. So I'm going to try to get us towards, because I wanted to do about a half an hour. So we've been on about 9 minutes. I wanted to ask you guys what you thought was kind of like a good low-hanging fruit type of project that not only isn't like a huge potential cost barrier, but also has enough practical sense that, you know, there might be even though there are always going to be some sort of economic barrier at sale price at a new product. What do you think can overcome that? What sort of low-hanging hemp project?
Want to go first, Taylor?
Yeah, for me, and I said it many times, and Dan, if I remember right, we've had the conversations about this, is looking at it from the fuel side, taking the stock portion of the plant in its entirety and just grinding it up essentially into dust, turning it into pellets to be used in co-firing of residential heating, or if you want to get real crazy and you can actually make enough of it, do co-firing with like a thermal power system, like a coal plant, but, you know, putting aside all of those regulatory hurdles and timelines and things like that. I don't know how doable that one is, but looking at the whole picture of the plant, everyone's doing stuff with flour. The seed is going into protein, seed meal, oil. But from what we've seen, at least here in the States, not much is being done with the stock, and getting that into an end-use application that can be grown and actually make the most sense dollar-wise. You can get up to about $1,000 per acre per harvest, just kind of using some basic metrics that we have and ones that we believe to be true on what we've seen, you can actually compete with about a $250 per ton comparison cost for fuel pellets. It doesn't require a lot of specialized manufacturing equipment. I don't even think you really need to decorticate it. You just gotta grind it down with hammer mills or knife mills, and then
how about a wood chipper?
I've tried that, and the fiber part really messed up some of the grinding material we use, but we didn't have anything that was super heavy duty. So even something like, I want to say a masticator, that might be what it's called. It's what they use to grind up stumps and logging. Something like that that's really beefy and has a lot of torque. Something like that could be
I mean, the flip side, though, is we did jam up that bale buster with the fiber, and it had a 260 horsepower tractor PTO on it, and it just jammed the entire thing up, right?
True.
So, I mean, the fiber totally was a terrible, terrible thing in some instances of what we were working on.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just having the right equipment, because I've been trying to steer this in a way where you don't need, or in a scenario where $250,000, $500,000, $1 million decorticator isn't a necessity. Because if you're not splitting the fiber stream and pushing that to a different market and just essentially pelletizing and burning it, I can just give you more overall material to go into market. But like James said, the tricky part is having that correct equipment that can deal with that. So that might be a solution to, or the solution to that could be retting it, letting it dry better, even running it through like a kiln dryer. There's some different things I'm sure that could be done, but it's the one that, for me, looking at it, requires the least amount of processing, and most importantly, the least amount of chemical processing, and at an end user level has the highest replacement cost or comparison cost, looking at, wood pellets you can get at Lowe's, Home Depot, or
I've worked with a guy that did his home heating with that. He had a wood pellet stove out in his yard. It was pretty interesting. I mean, I've seen the stuff. I've never really experimented much with the technology, but it makes sense because it isn't you're not having to handle it a lot. Once you get it ground down, then you're really just kind of reforming it, and you're not having to process it too much.
Yeah, and it's really a process of brute force rather than finesse. So you don't have to, I'm just thinking like the margins of error are much higher. You don't have to worry about, mixing ratios, food grade, pharmaceutical grade. Pretty much you just need to keep it clean and use the correct stuff, because there'll be dust so things don't explode. But, relative comparisons to other hemp derived products, this one to me seems to be on the easier, lower hanging fruit track that someone out there should pursue.
What about you, James? You got an idea of what you would do?
Yeah, so if I were to encourage a young hemp entrepreneur or someone who really was an advocate and wanted to get into it, I would really encourage them to approach it from actually making a completed hemp food. So it's something you could do very inexpensively if you're so hemp protein is approved under GRAS. It's generally regarded as safe. So it actually is approved to enter the food supply now. Same with hemp oil and whole hemp seeds. So you actually don't have any regulatory hurdles anymore. There has to be people who are extracting hemp oil in Canada, in the US, that are going to have the leftover hemp protein meal that can be worked with. I would really encourage people to follow the plant-based trend because it's very attractive to investors, even angel investors now, and really work on something that would get a household name for a hemp bar, right? So I'm thinking of something that follows very clean label, natural kind of approaches. But if you're under $500,000 in revenue, there's an exemption in the Food Safety Modernization Act that effectively lets you make stuff from a home kitchen. The home kitchen licenses are generally pretty inexpensive with your local health department. Usually a couple $100 to be able to start selling your stuff at a local farmer's market, which means you could make a legal completed hemp product and ratchet yourself up to, let's say, $495,000 worth of revenue in a given calendar year. And it's something you could literally make and package in your home kitchen. And so if you're good at cooking, if you're good at formulating, you could make something like the RX bar, which only has like 6 ingredients, is a great example. They sold to Kellogg's for a ridiculous amount of money if you actually research it. And so I think it's something that if someone had a really good idea and made something that tasted really good, it could advocate for the industry, because normally I think hemp tastes like dirt. And it's very earthy, right? So if you do something that tastes good, has nutritional value, really kind of appeals to a market segment, you can very inexpensively do something that would advocate for hemp products, create an offtake for hemp meal for the industry, and allow you to develop a product that could actually go and grow pretty quick and generate revenue and not have massive startup capital. If you have a kitchen and you can pay a little bit for the licenses, then you're just talking about some packaging, labeling costs, stuff like that. You could probably get a product all up running and launched for probably under 15 grand.
I like that the farmers market model. I know in my state we have the health department has very, very forgiving cottage industry laws.
Yeah, that cottage industry laws are usually, and so that if you're under that FSMA compliance threshold, which I believe is still $500,000 in revenue, you can do it. If you're doing hemp CBD or a cannabinoid, hitting $500,000 of revenue, unless you don't know what you're doing, is pretty quick, based on the, a $60, $80, $100 tincture or, $2 gummy or whatever. You don't have to sell very much to hit those thresholds.
No, but your investment is so much bigger.
Yeah, but pricing right now, your investment isn't that much bigger. It just depends on what you want to do. But if you want to do everything legit, be above board, be recognized as legal in your state and across the entire nation, that hemp protein, hemp meal pathway is a good one. The other one is looking at like the hemp oil for lots of alternatives, using it, if you could figure out how to turn hemp oil into an alternative for, let's say, eggs, right? Like a big thing people want to replace now is eggs. Could you figure out how to create an ingredient that effectively is like egg beaters, but it uses hemp oil? High in omega-3s, all that kind of stuff. There's lots of stuff that you could do that if you're willing to play around in your kitchen, your initial investment is not very high. And with everybody looking D2C anyways, direct to consumer, the opportunity to, spend $200 on a website and really start being able to sell and push is pretty low. So I think and it would support advocacy for hemp products and be completely legal. So you're not in like this nebulous gray area you get with CBD and other products.
Cool. Guys, thank you so much for your time. I have loved talking to you all, and I love working with you all and doing stuff on LinkedIn. I think you guys just bring so much to the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, that was our talk with Taylor Woods and James Stevens. Taylor's going with the energy route on some pellets for your wood stove. If you don't know what he's talking about, Google it, because it's really kind of interesting. And James is going with a food model, which actually was a light bulb moment for me, because I've thought about such things. Guys, thanks a lot. Talk to you on LinkedIn, and I'll let you know when I bring this up and post it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Bye-bye.